About a week ago now, I talked about an anime that I was speculating on and debating about if it was ever going to get a season two anime. And within that video, I briefly talked about and mentioned of another anime that I was also curious about talking about eventually, but of course, at this point, I don't know if it'll ever come out, and that is Cautious Hero, to be precise, or more specifically, Cautious Hero. The hero is overpowered but overly cautious. And for any of you longtime viewers who have been up to my channel at this point, I've also unfortunately talked about Cautious Hero in another previous video where I had to give it the mid tier rating anime review. And look, I want to kind of go on here and not only defend myself on why I gave it such a mid tier anime, but also simultaneously maybe just talk about and even gush over grains to like truthfully and honestly, like why this show should and honestly deserves a second season. But again, before we dive into like the weeds, like what happened and such, I just want to say that given like what happened in that video prior when I made my mid tier anime video, like every anime I gave a mid tier rating, Cautious Hero is one of those shows that for me at the end of the day, a lot of what I said in that video do still stands. But there is one little part that I forgot to mention in my mid-tier anime video, and that is if this anime was released maybe 2 years earlier than it did, or maybe a little bit around the time period when other big isekai shows were popping off like Konosuba, Overlord, ReZero, the big three that obviously I could name off my head, right? Would this show have popped off much harder than it should have? And honestly, like looking back at it, I really do think so because if this came out around the time period that it did, when big isekai shows were like the big thing, I think this would have been a really good smash hit. And after all, this show came out back in the fall of 2019 season, so at the very tail end of that year. But I'll show you in a little bit, there were other shows that year that unfortunately overshadowed Cautious Hero that also played a role to like why the show most likely isn't going to get a second season at this point, or to many people like why the show is considered underrated. So again, considering that Cautious Hero came out back in the fall 2019 season, as displayed here, again, like this show had everything going for it, as I mentioned already in my mid-tier anime video, where again, this was under White Fox Studios, which if you know White Fox Studios, they're the same main brains that were responsible for ReZero and the franchise that you know today. I mean, they even came up with their most recent third season as of late. But simultaneously, around that time this year too, I felt like this show, like I said, by the time the show came out, it was already too fast, too late. Because by that time period, if the show came out way earlier within that year, or maybe like 1 year earlier, as I mentioned already, it wouldn't be in the position that it is right now, where a lot of people are speculating, and I myself am wondering is if this ever is going to get a second season. Because around that same year, the very beginning of this year, there's one anime that stood out at the top as like the most polarizing but possibly the most popular isekai anime since Overlord, and that is Rising of the Shield Hero. Which again, I understand that now in the current day and age that Rising of the Shield Hero, and admittedly, the most recent seasons have been that great, at least in my view, but you can't deny that given how big, how impactful this first season was, and how many seasons this show has dived into since its first season, it's no surprise that Rising of the Shield Hero is still popular, still talked about to this day, despite the fact that again, the later seasons past this point haven't been that great or haven't reached the same heights of popularity that made the show special. Also, if you want to go into like what was around there in 2019, um, again, we have a lot of big shows that are coming out around this time with the fourth season of Boku no Hero Academia, the beginning of Beastars. Sora Online was actually starting to get a lot more watchable from what I've heard around this time period. Even the Seven Deadly Sins was also at its peak during this time. But it's more than just that too, because also that same year, a lot of the landscape of what anime major was going for at the time period was also shifting in a different direction. So by this point too, the isekai genre was starting to take a bit of dip in popularity. Where while it was popular in a sense, you also understand that like this show and even Cautious Hero to an extent are now kind of pitted towards other generic isekai trash copycats that's now being pumped and dumped like it's no tomorrow. And again, if you've seen like every like going back to like maybe what happened like 2 years ago, 3 years ago up to this point, there's a lot of generic isekai stuff out there. But going back to like what came out in 2019 that was also popping off, you even have shows like Ari Ferreta, which was another like pretty infamous show that really popped off that same year and really had a household name for itself. While I didn't consider watching this show because I don't really care about it, I can acknowledge that this is a really popular show that people still talk about to this day. Also, around this time period, big juggernaut shows like Dan Machi season 2 was popping off because of how intensely dark and subtle the show was going in at the time. And then, of course, the final nail of the coffin to like the mainstream anime that kind of shifted as a result was the release of Demon Slayer, the first season of Demon Slayer to be exact. And because of some of these shows, I wouldn't say that these were responsible for why we would never get a second season of Cautious Hero, but a lot of these things really contributed to why Cautious Hero might not get a season 2 as a result. So, like I said, I really do personally think that even though I gave this show, Cautious Hero, a 5 out of 10 mid tier anime review, I really do hope that this show gets a season 2 because it deserves it. Just like I talked about with Saga of Tanya the Evil, I think this show deserves it as well because this still has a lot of potential, a lot of untapped potential to be like really good, really funny, being able to finally like surpass and get through that whole allegation that hey, this is like another Konosuba ripoff because that's what again as someone who has watched this show not that long ago and looking back at it, I do feel like this is a bit Konosuba esque in a way. But if the show was given a second season, a second chance, mind you, I think the show would be able to stand itself apart from all the other shows that come out before it. I mean, after all, we even have like really good examples like Eminence and Shadows that proved to be super good and really proved people wrong that it wasn't just trying to copy off of other popular isekai shows. But I feel like Cautious Hero has to be the one to do that as well because at this point, I it makes me wonder like given that there is still a cult following with the show to this day, I think this show deserves season 2 because again, at the end of the day, when going back to the first season, the animation is still fire. The voice acting is clearly passionate as hell. On top of it, there were moments in the show where the music slapped, the action slapped. Like everything about the show had everything as a winning formula to success. And that's all I gotta say about this show, man. I think Cautious Hero, the hero is overpowered but overly cautious. This deserves a second season, my dog. It really deserves it. So yeah, until we get an announcement from White Fox Studios or maybe a different Isekai studio, I don't fucking know. We'll just have to wait and see. But until then, I just hope we get a second season of the show. And yeah, I just want to talk about this a bit. That's it. I'll see you on the next one. Later.